here with Untamed Motors. We are going to be discussing the car market crash of 2025, or whether or not we actually think it will crash, and kind of what a crash looks like. I would like to start out, and maybe you can kind of guide this by, there's been a lot of folks out there that say, oh, the car market hasn't crashed. YouTubers are saying it's going to crash. Financialists say it's going to crash. What do you think that looks like for 2025? Like, what does a real crash or correction look like?
Yeah, and I think that's a big point of contention for a lot of folks, right? When they see the word crash, what do they automatically think of? They think of, hey, it's going to be a 60% or 70% off, right? It's going to be a flash or fire sale, right? But that's not what reality has in store for us, right? I think the most realistic, in my personal opinion, a realistic quote unquote crash that we would see later this year, perhaps, would be that 10 to 15% below invoice across the whole dealership lot, right? I mean, that being them really pushing their vehicles. But I think that 10 to 15% off below invoice isn't really what people envision or what they really desire. And that's kind of where that rub comes for a lot of people. I don't know. What do you think? What is it that you see?
Yeah, I feel the same way. It depends on the brand too. We just bought I drive an old 2008 Sequoia, but my wife has now a new Volkswagen, which I never thought I'd buy. But it was like what you said, it was one of the only brands. We drove all these brands and I found, wow, Volkswagen was, 10 or 15% below invoice. And, I could buy a new car with 100,000 mile warranty, or I could buy this used 4Runner with 50,000 miles for the same price. Yeah. And so we kind of made the decision like, yeah, we'll go with that. But I do think that's like an outlier, and a lot of people don't want Volkswagen, they don't want a German car. So I think I would agree that I think all these manufacturers are lagging behind a little bit, but we're going to see that same idea of you're going to get the good financing and you're going to get the money off. Right now, you see GM and Toyota and everybody where they're like, yeah, you can get great financing. We're not going to give you a good deal on the car. Or you can take the cash, but not the financing. So when do you think it'll get there, in 2025? Do you think it's going to have a lag, like they're going to wait for tax season to play out? Or
I would say so. I mean, that's not uncommon year to year, that. Yeah. But I think now more than ever, we see a lot of dealerships really kind of holding firm. We talked about it before briefly, but the stalemate that we're kind of starting to see, right? A lot of dealerships are really trying to firm up on their discounts, like, hey, this is the deal, take it or leave it. In my personal opinion, it's going to serve to their detriment, right? Because I don't think they're going to have that luxury. Come May, June, July timeframe, when quote unquote tax season's over with, they're not going to have the luxury of trying just to move that inventory anymore, and them holding out. Well, the buyers are just not there. That supply has far exceeded demand, and that's abundantly clear when you look at the numbers right now.
Yeah, driving the lots today. It depends on the brand. Toyota is traditionally always, I feel like they've been kind of holding back inventory a little bit. But then you see General Motors, Ford, Kia, they're just 5 acres full, and they're selling vehicles. But how many do you think are fleet? Or, lease is up a lot. So
yeah, I think, the fleet versus retail is always kind of a misleading number often reported by manufacturers, right? I think it is directly in line with how manufacturers often report their sales. Yeah, I think we talked about it briefly too, with Ford often bragging about the number of vehicles they've delivered, quote unquote delivered. They use that word all the time. That doesn't mean they sold them. What does that mean? That means they dropped them off to their Ford dealerships, and now they're collecting dust on their Ford dealerships, but they still hype it up and beat their chest with those kind of figures. So I can find that misleading and pretty upsetting, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And people, they tend to shop so much more because of the price of vehicles by monthly payments and lease. It's like that's all they care about. They don't want to own anything. Own nothing and be happy life.
It's a shame. Yeah. No, for sure. I guess, on that note, what are some examples of once very desirable vehicles that went for markups and huge premiums that are now going for discounts, sub MSRP? What are some of the prime examples that you've noticed?
Yeah, like we were talking about, look at the Raptors, look at your buddy just bought that ZR2 Bison. So maybe you want to tell that story about how, maybe a year ago that was 10 grand over MSRP and now it's not.
Yep. No, there's one of my buddies, I just helped him out. He was buying a Chevy Colorado ZR2 Bison. So if you're unfamiliar, you get the Chevy Colorado, and ZR2 is a trim of it, more off-road version of it, of course. Then the Bison kind of adds some additional features, steel bumpers, some additional stitching, some additional flair. The MSRP on his was, I believe, 62 or 63,000, I believe, right around there. Ended up being collectively about $5,000 off is what he ended up getting for it, which, he felt really good about it. And I don't know if I believe it. We did ask to see the invoice from the dealership, and he claimed it to be 58,200. I'm not sure if I actually believe that, but he sent me over a sheet and he highlighted it. This is invoice, blah, blah, blah. But I know the profit margin does kind of shrink a little bit when you start getting those higher trim vehicles that have like the Bison package, which are AEV additions to it. But he got $5,000 off. Last year, 2 years ago, I think we both can agree. I mean, a lot of those were going for 5,000 over, right? 5,000, 10,000 over pretty regularly. So, I mean, that's a prime example there. Although he feels really good about it. When you compare that to like the Silverado or F-150s, those are coming with, $10,000 off regularly. That's a pretty common discount. So when you compare that to that, it's hard to get wildly excited about it. But that profit margin may be just smaller. Yeah,
it might be. And it's funny because I think folks think that the profit margins are bigger. Like, there's a much bigger gap between MSRP and what they actually build it for. Mm-hmm. I actually think there is less of a gap because of all the UAW, contracts, and the cost of labor's gone up, and it's just like things haven't stabilized with the wages of the consumer, the wages of the people that build the vehicles, and then now the threat of tariffs.
Yeah. I mean, that's a natural progression for that topic. Obviously, a little bit more of a controversial one, and not to get into politics per se in our chat here, but like, what do you honestly foresee being the impact of tariffs on vehicle sale prices?
Oh, man, I have no idea what's going to happen. When I look at the sticker on a car, it's usually like 33% Mexico, but a ton of the chips and the electronics come from China. And so that's another 10%. When you look at manufacturer profits, I think you saw GM come out with, and Toyota came out with statements saying they didn't think in the short term it would affect sales or the cost of vehicles short term. Toyota set up a little better than everyone else. They have so many manufacturing, in the US, and so many little hubs in the US, and then a lot of stuff comes from Japan. I think they're going to be fine, other than maybe the Tacoma, anything that's coming from that Mexico plant. But the Tundra's in the US, the Alabama plant produces the Tundra engine. So yeah, it's tough to say. I think it's going to be dependent on the manufacturer, how much is coming from Mexico and China and Canada, and how nimble they are. Like Toyota's kind of nimble just because they're so global, but the other manufacturers like GM and Ford, and they might struggle a little bit more.
I agree. I think, and I don't think this is necessarily a popular based on a lot of comments I've gotten in my videos, but I do believe like it would be company suicide for them to stack on a 25% at this point in time. If they were to hike up the price tag of that Tacoma tomorrow, 25% more than what they already have it at, I mean, that would just it would kill that Toyota Tacoma nameplate, in my opinion, right? I mean, they already kind of have neutered it to some degree.
Yeah.
Controversial there a little bit, but and we already see them discounting $6,000 to $8,000 off of mini trims outside of the TRD Pro and Trail Hunter, of course. So they don't have that luxury to just hike it up 25% more than what they already did. I think the realistic thing that they would do is try to spread out that additional tariff amounts across all of their vehicles, right? So just hike them up just a little bit, all of them. So we ultimately will eat it, but they just can't force it onto one vehicle because that one particular vehicle is more so built out of country.
Well, it's tough with the parts too. I think that's the bigger thing because they could manufacture them here. And that would actually probably raise costs more than just the tariffs alone, if they come into American wages. But yeah, you wonder what'll happen more long-term than anything, but maybe it will bring some manufacturing back. I mean, that's the end goal, is to try to not just be a service-based country. And right now, I don't want higher prices in anything, including cars, but at the same time, I think it's a pain the country is going to have to go through to reset and not just be like a consumer country. And our only leverage right now against China and anyone else is our consumption. And once we lose that, or if we lose our consumption leverage, do you really think they're going to play nice with us? No. So I understand that tariff idea and trying to swing the pendulum back to get some jobs back here and some manufacturing back here, but who knows if it'll work out the way they want.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is fascinating to me, and it frustrates me to know how much Toyota saves by outsourcing production of some vehicles to cheaper labor countries, especially having shifted that Tacoma entirely to Mexico. Like you just would have thought that maybe they would have kept that price tag right about the same, right, as the third generation Tacoma. But for them to have hiked it up as much as they did after saving over 80%, when it comes to labor costs, I mean, the average wage hourly is $16 to $18 per hour down in San Antonio, Texas, right, for employees, American employees, where they pay on average about $2.70 per hour to Mexican employees down in Mexico. So about over 80% savings, but we didn't see any of it. So that's a part of the rub for me, you know.
I see a lot of folks in the comments too. They say, well, it's, Mexican made, and that's why it doesn't, why we're having problems. And actually they're relating it to the Tundra. It's like, well, actually, no, the Tundra is American made. It's probably more of an engineering problem or some other process problem or a machine problem. But
I mean, there's no denying that there's state-of-the-art facilities down in Mexico, right? I think it's, to be fair, we need to make that clear. But still, the individuals producing the product, and it makes me wonder if they're getting paid that much, do they take tremendous pride in doing it, right? Where comparatively to getting paid a higher wage, of course.
Yeah. How do you think that? So I've heard the argument from other YouTubers that say, the inflation is not that bad on vehicles. You've seen the argument of taking the CPI index and saying, well, a car 10 years ago only costs 5 or 10,000 more today. And that's, right in line with inflation or actually below. What do you think the other factors are with, beyond just the price of the vehicle that upset people so much with these prices?
No, the obvious response to that is just the collective, right? The collective cost of everything, right? Everything has gotten grossly expensive. The cost of living, cost of grocery, cost of mortgage, blah, blah, blah. But insurance, I think, really has been the silent killer for so many people. Your annual insurance premiums have skyrocketed, and they, no kidding, have doubled across the country in the last 2.5, 3 years at this point. So that kind of sneaks up on people when you combine that with we mentioned it plenty of times on my channel, but the national average monthly payment on a new vehicle is just over $760 per month. And when you combine that with that insurance premium that is over doubled, it sneaks up on people, and that becomes just overbearing, right? So I think it's just the collective of everything hitting at once. It has really been burdensome for Americans.
It'll be telling probably after tax season, during the summer months, I think that'll be the true test of when. See if I can present it here without sharing my entire screen. Yeah, I don't know if that works. Okay, so did you see the outstanding credit card balances recently?
No, I have not seen this.
Yeah, this is you're looking at 2008 kind of. It's just really similar to what happened in 2008. You see that spike way up in credit card balances, and then as we recovered from that great financial crisis, it dumps back down. But you see it kind of drop in COVID, where everybody just hunkered down and saved, and then it just shoots to the moon recently. Yeah, 1.2 trillion in credit card debt.
Isn't that wild? Yeah, you can tell. Yeah, right after COVID, people went full YOLO, right?
Yeah.
It clearly shows right there. I mean, the last report that I had seen, and correct me if you've seen something different, but that national average per person of credit card debt was just over $7,200. So imagine that. The average American out there walking around burdened with $7,200 of credit card debt. And that's the average. Obviously, a lot of people more, a lot of people less, but it's kind of, I don't know, kind of wild to hear that. So, I mean, it's no surprise that people are drowning right now. And, well, that kind of compounds to the issue of the car market at large, right? That's why we are seeing that that exponential growth of inventory levels. Not to say people aren't buying, of course they are. They're going to continue to buy, but that production is clearly outpacing that demand. And that ultimately leads to, like what we talked about before, what are those ripple effects? What happens next as we begin to fill up these lots? What comes next?